Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Petaluma Historical Library and Museum. I am Paula Freund, and I'm the curator of the present exhibit here. And when I organized the exhibit, I wanted to get some wonderful people to come and coordinate their presentations with the exhibit. And of course, my dear friend Jeff Elliot was my first choice. And I said, you can speak on whatever you would like to, Jeff. And he chose to speak about the early work of Brainerd Jones. And that's so wonderful, and it's so appropriate to coordinate with the exhibit, and I know he's going to have some wonderful gems of information for us. He is kind of interesting, but behind the screen, which we're using for his presentation, is the information about Brainerd Jones in relationship to the exhibit. So when he's done, we'll put it up, and if you want to, you can come over and see them. The entire collection of blueprints by Brainerd Jones for this building is not, we haven't found them, but we have found 5 of them. And they've been scanned, and they're here on the wall. And the facade is behind the screen, and that's the most beautiful one. So we'll put that up so you can see it. But let's get going. I think many of you know Jeff Elliot. He is a Santa Rosa historian, and he has one of the most amazing blogs. He is so prolific. The amount of subjects he has addressed that has to do with Sonoma County history is overwhelming, and the thoroughness is absolutely amazing. I don't know how he produces so much scholarship. I have a hard time just reading it to keep up with it. I save his blogs to read later when I can really concentrate and really enjoy them.
And I have never been so honored to be not read. Read later.
Okay. So, thank you, sir, and we are pleased to have you here, and we look forward to this.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Well, we're talking really about the making of young Jones, how he came to be the architect he was. We're going to be talking indeed about his first years of architecture, but really the emphasis on how did this guy do what he did. Why did he design these buildings that are all over Petaluma and Santa Rosa and elsewhere in Sonoma County? And I think it'll all make a little more sense to you when you see his background, where his roots were. This whole presentation, it will also be on the web in this address here, probably late tomorrow if I don't sleep. It'll have all the slides. It'll have basically most of my speech on it, so you can come back and references. There'll also be web links to some of the things I'm talking about. So, first thing I'd like to do is to go back up, is to thank some people. Ron, Catherine, and Donna here. Donna, who really helped out with doing some of this research. And I thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And so here we are. So if you can say there was a Renaissance period in American architecture, it would have been San Francisco in the 1890s. The city was vibrant, with what was going on, the possibilities. Buildings were being designed that had never been imagined before. And in the middle of all this was a 20-something young man from Petaluma who was absorbing it all. He designed high-fashion mansions and also simple homes. He was adept at both older styles and the avant-garde. If there's any other architect as versatile as this, I don't know who it is. So he had no formal training. He didn't study architecture at a college, and he didn't apprentice at a good firm. He apprenticed at a second or third-rate firm. His only credentials were having worked as a carpenter and as a draftsman. Yet there he was at the turn of the century in Petaluma, hanging out his shingle as an architect. A genius is simply not a person with a big grab bag of tricks and techniques. And a masterpiece is more than the sum of its parts. You're not just checking off a list of what's considered attractive and pleasing. Whether he's a genius or not, I can't say, but he was definitely an artist. But how do you determine what's a masterpiece? How do you know what's really good architecture? How can you say that objectively? And what I like to do is I like to play a little game. And the game is, how easy could you have screwed this up? So Here we are, our building. Here we are again. And, well, you know, one thing he could have done, instead of bringing in the sand-colored stone from the quarry over at Stony Point, you know, he could have just used the basalt from McNair's quarry, just right on the edge of town. You know, shop local. You know, it's locally sourced, but, you know, the dark gray stone would have made it look like this. This would also would have matched the Santa Rosa Carnegie Library, which had just been built just before. Well, he didn't do that. But you know, he also could have done what he did in Santa Rosa for the post office in 1910. This is now the Sonoma County Museum. They did this Beaux Arts neoclassical Spanish colonial mashup with this big tile roof and this portico with the Corinthian columns. But you know, this is the public library is an important building. You know, why not put on a clock tower? You know, that's what they did in Santa Rosa. That, you know, in 1907, John Galen Howard, who was one of the most respected architects on the West Coast, he built this beautiful Beaux-Arts building in downtown Santa Rosa, the bank building. But what they did is they put on this clock tower. This clock tower goes back 40 years. This is old Second Empire stuff. So essentially their beautiful Beaux-Arts modern building became the base for a stupid clock. But Jones, what I'm getting at is that Jones is really, his genius was really subtractive. You know, it's not what he did, it's not all the things he put on a building, it's what he didn't. So if you want to look where he really starts, you've got to go back to when he was, let's see now, he would have been 7 years old. Because back then, you know, this is right after the Civil War. This is what American architecture was like. We were a nation of Greek revival-like farmhouses and federal buildings and some colonial styles that were just local to a particular area where they started. It wasn't very interesting. The builders had really limited skills. They worked without plans. Because they had built this house or a house like this dozens and maybe hundreds of times before. Their guides and their manuals only contained the directions on how to do classical ornamentation and, you know, follow basic classic principles. But what we're going to see here is that modern architecture, American architecture, really starts here in 1876. This was the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia. This was a huge deal. Over 2.5 million, no, that's wrong, it's more than that, we'll get to that. Enormous number of people came here to see this, and it was at a time in America where we're discovering nostalgia for the first time. You know, we're finally realizing, oh, wait a second, we have, as Americans, this fantastic past. And part of it was escapism because they were going through this long depression. But you know, all the popular books and all the magazines and the plays were all about how wonderful colonial times were. We all lived in cozy cottages, and we all, you know, went out and we all had sheep in the fields, and it was just, we all fought the heroic cause. And remember, you know, the Civil War is just over a dozen years ago. So all these things that were colonial became really popular again, including furniture and building styles. Now, they were so colonial nuts at the fair, they even had, they had this recreation of the 1776 New England kitchen with actors there playing, you know, colonial people in costumes. They had, again, it's a World's Fair, so they have all these pavilions representing the states. This is Illinois. And, you know, what this does is expose how limited American architecture was at this time, 1876. It's this Gothic style, and it's, you know, loaded with ornamentation all around on the barge boards. It's, you know, it's Gothic. But they also, at the fair, they encountered architecture they'd never seen before. One was this is the British compound, and they had these lovely Queen Anne style buildings. Again, we'd never seen this before really in America, but this is one of the things they were talking about in the newspapers and magazines all throughout the fair, how wonderful it was. This style had been popular already in England for several years. And the other big deal was the Japanese dwelling. This is an aesthetic with simple, clean lines. Again, you hadn't seen in the U.S. and had the highest craftsmanship to it. An observer said it was like it's put together as nicely as a piece of cabinet work. Inside there was an open floor plan, no doors, and Atlantic Monthly says it made everything else look commonplace and vulgar. So 10 million people attended the fair, and it's equivalent of about 1 in 5 Americans. And as a result, Victorian Gothic, with all that busy gingerbread ornamentation, it quickly lost favor. And something started to emerge, which we now call American Queen Anne. It actually evolved. This is a transition house, and you can see it's got some interesting features. It's not the heavy Gothic with the icicles and the other ornaments to it. It's still got a lot of scroll work, but it's and it's also got this curvy elements with this gazebo wrap attached to the house. And here's another transition Queen Anne. It's got a big roof and more curvy elements, and again a gazebo attached to the house. But in a remarkably short time, American Queen Anne became the American style. All these boundless variations you could do with the thing made people love it. It lost all connection by already to its historic roots, but it's popular because it was new. It was picturesque. It was the latest thing you could get. And they were pretty easy to build. Now, normally out here in the Pacific Coast, we lag behind the East Coast in all things. But the Queen Anne style came up simultaneously. This is 1881, the Atherton House in San Francisco. So we're simultaneously all over the country developing these Queen Annes. Now, one of the reasons they caught on is because of these trade magazines that taught you how to build a Queen Anne. Most architects and builders had never done turrets and these other strange shapes, strange elements. But now there's this magazine called American Architect and Builders News, which also started in 1876. We suddenly now have standardized American architecture. And all over through the 1880s and 1890s, Queen Anne's sprouted up like mushrooms in San Francisco. So before introducing Brainerd Jones in San Francisco, here's another one. We got to rewind a bit back to the Centennial Exhibition and meet the birth of the Queen Anne's twin. And this was what was called shingle style. It was really artistic Queen Anne. It was created by a whole group of East Coast architects with mixed Tudor elements with the aspects of a Japanese building. It's wider than it is tall. It's got this big, heavy roof. It's got as many windows as it could possibly put in a building. And the interiors were open, big open plan like the Japanese had. And hallways and vestibules were no longer places to walk through. They were no longer corridors going from one place to the other. They were now places you would actually live and have a fireplace and enjoy sitting around. So unlike the flashy Queen Anne, these architects, they were consciously trying to create something artistic. They wanted these houses to look like they were centuries old. They would do things like they would take the shingles they used constantly and age them in buttermilk, or paint them green like they were mold, moss, I should say. But they did these things. They really wanted to look old. But it's notice too that there's minimal ornamentation on this thing. The only thing you really have is, and I get to use my green toy for the first time, and as I fall backwards, this rattan work, or rather this work over here that looks like rattan or maybe wicker. So in the letters, what was interesting going on at the same time is that the letters, here's another one. In the letters section of these magazines, the Harper's, the philosophy and the aesthetics was really being debated, and they were being debated hotly. For some, they wanted really to create a new American style, but others argued a higher objective was unity, like this, which meant the building has to be in harmony with its setting. But they came up with all these amazing things. Some of the buildings even look ultra-modern today. This is the Low House. This was torn down in 1962 to build a ranch house. But these are mammoth houses. They were built all over the East Coast, and they were commissioned by wealthy families. It's the Gilded Age in America. There's lots of, again, you've got lots of money hanging around. This is, you saw them in Newport, and you saw, this is, what is it, Elberon, New Jersey. Elberon was the Newport for the Nouveau Riche. And look at that, it just goes on into the horizon. So, while popular Queen Anne was really quick in San Francisco, it took 10 years for shingle style to arrive. And that's because San Francisco in the 1880s had a reputation as being really a provincial backwater. They were indifferent to the arts, there was no museum, and they didn't really even care about architecture. If there was a big commission, it went to a firm in Chicago or New York. But then an architect named Page Brown came out here and, opened a trial office. And he was swamped with work. But everyone wanted to have one of these houses, those nice shingle-style houses, built. So what he did is that he rated the East Coast architects firms of some of their best talent. So out here came people who we're going to see in a minute, like Willis Polk and some of the others. They'd all worked for the top firms in the East. Maybach worked with them for a while too. So again, it's like the second generation of builders, architects are coming out here. This is a drinking party from 1890. We're going to meet several of our people we're going to talk to. This is Willis Polk's apartment in San Francisco. This guy here is Ernest Coxhead, who we're going to be talking about. This guy is Willis Polk. All these guys, architects, are within just a few years of Brainerd Jones's age. And another one that's about the same age is Julia Morgan. Well, what she did, she's not in this picture, obviously, but she at the time was just starting at UC Berkeley, and she was going to be studying architecture with Maybach. I could easily imagine, since Brainerd Jones was 21 at the time, I like to look at this picture and imagine, well, he's not in this photo because they sent him out for the cake. One of the other guys here is pretty obscure, but he's important. This is, Edgar, no, I get backwards. Soleil Edgar Fisher, there on the end. Fisher, out here, designed one of the first really interesting buildings in that shingle style. This is the Anna Head School in Berkeley. He designed this in 1892. It's still there. Berkeley is famously left in poor condition for the last 30 years. The smart talk is that they're hoping it's going to burn down. But it's in terrible shape. It's still there. You can still go there and see this building. We visited it and did a survey. But it's firmly, there's no, the fancy popular Queen Anne here. This is just true shingle style. And we're going to see some more of those shingle examples here. This is Page Brown's. This is the old people's house that Crocker had built in San Francisco. Remember we had talk to Mr. Coxhead. This is a house he built in San Anselmo. This is a house he built. Let's get one. Oh, this is a fraternity in Berkeley. I know which one. For some reason, they didn't write it down. So this is Berkeley. This is a Churchill house that he built in Napa. It's still there. You can visit it. It's a bed and breakfast called, what is it? The Cedar Gables Inn. And this is a house Maybach designed for his friend Charles Keeler. We'll talk about him in a minute. And then there was this, hopefully, wind tune. This was William Randolph Hearst's hunting lodge. And surprisingly, there's only 2 photos of it that exist anywhere. They're not very good. Everybody worked on this. Willis Polk worked on this. Maybach worked on this. Julian Morgan worked on it. It was a spectacular place. You've got, remember Coxhead? Well, you've got, Coxhead just down the street.
Oh.
St. John's Episcopal Church. Coxhead designed that for you guys in 1890. And the same year he designed that church, he designed this in San Francisco. Isn't that amazing? Wouldn't you like to build that out of sand on the beach?
Yeah.
But American Queen Anne and the shingle style architecture, the building types, the styles, are 2 of the influences on Brainerd Jones. The third influence was the newsstand, because there have been those trade periodicals we talked about that taught people how to build things. Well, there's suddenly now, in the mid-1880s and going forward, a lot of popular interest in architecture. This was Chappelle's was a monthly magazine. They sold 10,000 copies every month. But again, strong general interest in, I want to know more about houses and what they look like and how they're built. It's a popular interest thing. Another trend that was very popular at the time were George Barber's pattern books. This man did more than anybody else to establish the look of an American Queen Anne. The turrets, the witch's hat, gable and everything. He sold blueprints for over 20,000 houses. Probably much more than that was built by people just looking at the pattern books and taking his floor plans and improvising. Incredibly influential man. And then he launched a magazine called American Homes. This appealed to a wider audience, not necessarily people interested in house plans, but this included poetry and general interest articles with lots of photographs. It was like a coffee table magazine. Another magazine, we're going to talk about magazines for just a little bit more, was Keith's. Keith's was incredibly influential. It was like, if you remember in the mid-20th century, popular mechanics, popular electronics, this was that. It was DIY projects. It was for the technically interested people. When Barber's own magazine closed, he started publishing his building plans here. But there are also the magazines that had enormous circulations, such as House Beautiful. They began presenting more articles about modern trends in residential design. Essentially, what these magazines were doing, they're making celebrities of the homes of the rich and famous. So they do these big spreads about the latest, so-and-so's wonderful living room and how nice the whole back porch is. There's even a magazine called Country Gentleman, which was the oldest magazine that was in rural America, started doing these feature articles on houses. This issue is from much later. I just love that drawing so much. I had to show it to you. The final one that was really important was Gustav Stickley's The Craftsman. Now this is a true general interest magazine. It had short fiction, it had poetry, it had children's stories in it, and then you would have these scholarly, in-depth articles about things like Korean furniture from the 17th century. It was very well written. It was a beautiful magazine, and it popularized the word bungalow. We'd never heard the word bungalow really in the U.S. before. And nearly every issue had one of his modern craftsman home designs in it. And they're beautiful things. They were full of arts and crafts, because that's what Stickley was, and of course it still is all about. Now, the reason this is important is because what we're seeing here, this whole general picture, this is probably what Brainerd Jones saw on the coffee table, or the dining room table, when he went to meet a new client. They were probably dog-eared, or they had, the magazines had been pictures clipped out. But again, it's popular interest. People really wanted to know about houses at the time. And that's important because here's the perspective on Brainerd Jones, that there's so much exposure to modern architecture in popular media, these people he was talking to already had strong opinions of what they liked and what they didn't. So when you look at Brainerd Jones and you see him design all these different styles, well, it's because he's collaborating far more than we would think today with an architect. They were actually more involved and they were more opinionated about what they wanted to have in these different styles. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Mr. Brainerd Jones. Born in Chicago, 1869, came out here to Petaluma at the age of 6 after his father died. As a teenager, he was recognized as a local fair for his drawing skills and his ability in netting, which was a kind of crochet. He supposedly took art lessons from Max Roth, who was a guy who had he was a marble cutter and stoneworker who had a yard over in Western Avenue. You know Max Roth?
I was just introduced to you yesterday by a descendant of Mr. Evans who cut the cornerstone for this building.
Wow. Roth's son was a famous cartoonist. We'll talk about that later. So I believe it. I just can't find any documentation on it. The first sighting of Jones we have as an adult, at least the one I can find, is that he's a carpenter in Tiburon in 1892. And then the year after that, he's still a carpenter, this time in San Mateo. His first professional gig is he's a draftsman in 1896 for the firm Dougal & Son. Now, this is not a prestigious place to work. You know, their offices were in San Francisco, but most of their work was in Bakersfield, where they did hospitals, schools, and jails. You know, no residences, just these buildings that have apparently all been lost, you know, forgettable civic buildings. The successor business, however, was McDougall and Sons. McDougall Brothers. And after the 1906 earthquake, they became a very big deal. So Jones is often, they said, oh, he worked at this prestigious firm. No, he didn't. They became prestigious long after he was gone. But, you know, we're still with Jones in San Francisco. And then it was still, you know, it was a gaudy party town. But by the mid-1890s, it's quickly developing a reputation for, you know, cultural and, you know, intellectual stuff. And in 1894, we had this in Golden Gate Park. This had 2.5 million people came out here, and again, it was like a little World's Fair, where you had people coming from all over the world, and there was a Chinese pagoda exhibit and other wonderful things to see. And it brought to San Francisco its first art museum. This is the early version of the De Young. It's done, I guess, in Neo-Egyptian style because the city was really founded by Imhotep or something. But this is a time of really heated politics and all kinds of activism. Architecture was no exception. There was a magazine called The Wave that was the literary periodical of for literature and the arts. And Willis Polk, who we remember the architects we saw back there before, he was savagely attacking the popular Queen Anne style. He'd run articles with photos of these monstrosities on what he called Chaos Avenue. I mean, this guy really had a mouth on him. You know, if Willis Polk was alive today, he would have been kicked off Twitter in like a day. Yeah. extremely opinionated. But he was he was a strong intellectual, and again, strongly opinionated. The same year as the fair was going on, there was a grassroots City Beautiful type movement going on in San Francisco that they sought to encourage or maybe even require that architectural design standards should be set by the city's Guild of Arts and Crafts. The excitement wasn't just in San Francisco. This is the Berkeley Hills. Berkeley and Oakland are becoming intellectual centers. And part of that's UC Berkeley. The Hearsts and Levi Strauss gave these huge endowments to the university, and it drew a lot more of the architecture to that area. Now, we've seen now this, several things here going on about all these buildings. Just imagine, you're Brainerd Jones, you're 20-something. You're excited, you're a young man, you're interested in architecture, you don't have any background, but you've got all this stuff that's just swirling around you. Everywhere you look, there's something exciting going on. And I can't think of another time in American history where there have been so much exciting things going on in something like architecture. Here's another group, just as the shingle style was arguing over unity, the artistic California circles wanted simplicity and living in surroundings that are just as natural as possible. The poet Charles Keeler, we saw his Maybeck House drawing back there a while back. He wrote that a really nice thing. The home must suggest the life it is to encompass. Mere architecture and furnishings of the house do not make the man any more than do his clothes, but they certainly have an effect on modifying him. The architectural magazines began discussing the philosophy of John Ruskin. And there are Ruskin clubs all over the Bay Area and in many cities. This is a photo from a Ruskin club from later years. Does anybody recognize this fellow?
Yeah, Jack London.
Jack London. This is Jack London in 1901. He was writing Call of the Wild. I'm not sure if he looks horrified or he's just trying to stay awake. It's a great expression. So, Jones moved back to Petaluma in 1898, where he registered to vote and gave his profession as a glassman. Now, I presume that means someone's working in art and stained glass. It's not a glazier, it's a glassman. This window's from the dining room of a 1901 house he designed in Santa Rosa. By 1900, he's living over on English Street, and he's listing himself now as an architect. So, Jones's first commissions came from his sisters Mary and Helen Byrne in 1900 and 1901. They lived here in Petaluma from 1900 to 1907. Why they came here is unknown. They lived for many years in Chicago, and they are originally from the Kirchner, Ontario area. On the left is Mary. Her full name was Mary Therese. There was a story about her that she always called herself by her initials. It was always referred to in the papers as Miss M.T. Byrne. And she brought with her the family heirloom. And her name came from the heirloom, which was the gown worn by Queen Marie Therese of Austria when the Queen attended the marriage of her daughter, Marie Antoinette. So she showed off the gown. Apparently it was beautifully ornate. It had taken hundreds and hundreds of hours to make. She had a shop downtown where she sold fancy work and taught fancy work. Anyway, the Byrne sisters commissioned 4 Brainerd Jones houses. Now, these are cottages that were both on the east side and the west side of town. One we know is lost. One can't be found. I think it probably wasn't built. Another one wasn't. It's been so badly remodeled that you only tell it's a building. I didn't even mention it. But the best surviving Byrne cottage is this one. Corner of Post and Stanley Street. And it's classic Queen Anne. You could not be more classic Queen Anne. It's got the spindle work to frame the porch. And it's got these beautiful little coves over the windows. Really nice looking house.
What street is that on?
It's 332 Post. Corner of Post and Stanley. And I found this thanks to that map. Thanks, Catherine. Just for that alone, it's just when you're dead. So this is 1901. This is being built late 1901. But earlier that year, there was the Bice House. Everyone knows the Bice House. We're on Liberty Street. It's conventional Queen Anne. Corner tower, usual fish scales. But the thing that's kind of unusual about it here is over this part. He's got this window's pediment around over here, and all this detail around the attic window. And then of course, then that's right, the finials, these finials. So it's Gothic, and this stuff at the time, the metalwork and the finials at the top. So, it's Queen Anne with also some Gothic elements, not too many. It's a real mix. But compare the Bice House with the Harriet Brown House, built in 1904. Yeah, there's similarities. The porte cochere, nice big one there. It's probably Jones's most conservative design. It's got all these Victorian busy work things on it, from the widow's walk at the top to more and more finials, like two. Why have one finial when you can have two? What's interesting here is that there's two elements in this house that Jones used again and again and again. And one is this pattern, which Sean Montoya called the Union Jack. It's really a Roman decoration, classic Roman decoration. And these deconstructed Palladian windows. Jones does this again and again and again from this point on in all his houses. So here's a deconstructed Palladian window, and underneath another deconstructed Palladian window. And he does something really funny here. He's got this broken pediment, and inside it is another broken pediment. This is architect's humor. I've never seen that before. I'm going to jump back to 1901. We saw those two Queen Annes. Here's another one. This is the one he built in Santa Rosa. This is the Lumsden House. It's now Gary's the Belvedere on Mendocino Ave. This picture is important because now this entire front has been hidden by foliage. The stained glass we saw earlier, that's also from this house. Now, tasteful color. I really wonder if this glass was done by Jones. I mean, it certainly seems to fit the general style of both that and what we see here. Like the other two homes we've seen, Lumsden, it's firmly American Queen Anne. It's probably, there's not a whole lot of interest to it. But this is 1901. This is the busiest year in his life. At the same time, he's building 9 houses. Santa Rosa, Petaluma, probably Cloverdale. He's incredibly busy. Oh, and Tamales, in fact, Tamales. He's building a house in Tamales. He's building all these different things, and it's just this one year. My Lord, what a business! And at the exact same time he's building this, right next door, he's building this. This was the Paxton House. It was torn down in '69, and guessing from the fire mass, I think it's between 6,500 and 7,000 square feet. Best house ever built in Santa Rosa, I'm sure.
And where was it?
It was in the corner of it's right across the street from the Belvedere we just saw.
Okay.
Mendocino Avenue, corner of Carrillo. It's now an office building, but it's a spectacular house. And here's what I think Brainerd Jones did. I think he was extremely creative, and he created this design because of another place we saw before. It's got, if you look at it, it's got a lot of the same features. They both got the big, heavy roof of the shingle style. The doorways about in the same place, each place. Here, the big gable and chimney become a turret. Here, the cross gable becomes this pop-out window in the living room. And most particularly, notice there's entranceways here. It's always to the left. The window doors are set. and there's a parapet in the front, so you really can't see it. So I'm completely convinced that Jones took an existing design that was at that time just 8 years old, and said, I'm going to use that, and I'm going to build a really big house. Well, just a second. So, as far as I know, and I've looked for this for years, I haven't seen any other architect that designed both in that classic Queen Anne style we've seen and this shingle style. I mean, it's like you're saying, I can be a great artist. I can do something very creative like this, but at the same time, you know, I'll do the Bice house, or the Peggy Sue house. You know, this pretty little thing that looks like a decoration more than, you know, a big, substantial home like this. Well, here's another view of it. This is the side view of the Paxton house. And 3 years later, Jones came out back and designed another shingle-style house just 2 doors down. This is for a friend of the Paxtons. This is Jones's drawing of it. Together, they really must have made a statement because, again, they're just, you know, they're the same block facing the same way. Just here, seen just right after the 1905 completion, you can see the house is just lots of windows everywhere. It's got, again, deconstructed Palladian window, above another deconstructed Palladian window. This house is completely asymmetrical. You know, the gable doesn't complete here, doesn't complete here, but on the other 2 sides it does. He's got everything's slightly off center, and here, you see this feature? That's just decoration. It's like he's got this big bracket holding at the top floors. It's not structural at all. It's just a silly little decoration he put in. It's just full of, this house is just full of whimsy. But this design also shows that Jones himself was really following what was going on in the magazines. Remember Stickley's Craftsman? Well, this design appeared in Stickley's magazine in 1904, early 1904. And then just a few months later, Jones did a painting of this house he was getting ready to build. And there it is. So now, did he copy Stickley? Well, I think he did. And I'm going to take a moment here to explain why. Now, this type of roof is called a gambrel roof. And they're remarkably stable things. This building is going to remain, the roof on that is going to remain plumb until that thing just tips completely over. But here's the thing about it. They're sturdy, but there's some rules to building them. You know, you can't, this side here, the lower part, is of course both roof and wall. So what it has to do, it has to bear the load. It has to bear the stress, you know, of the rest of the roof. If you did what Jones and Stickley were doing, a house like this, what would happen is if there's any stress on that, it would fly apart. So if this house had been built, it would not have survived the 1906 earthquake. No question at all about it. And Stickley never actually built any of those houses in that picture we just saw. The buildings that were built were more of the conventional, you know, gambrel shape. Here's a house just before. Here's a picture of the house just before we started the restoration. This also makes a point about the roof, is that Jones and these other guys in Stickley, they were really terrible engineers. Now, you know, okay, so the first design of the house wouldn't work. Here we have an example how he didn't understand how rain would affect a house of this type. You can see here what the previous owners had tried to do is they built a rain stop. And that was to keep water from just gushing down. Well, it turns out that almost all the water on the entire roof, over 2/3 of it, comes down in just this area. So the answer was, Jones didn't understand that he needed to have the gutters twice as wide and twice as deep. And there's also now a diverter over here to push the water into the trough. But, again, if he had been an engineer, taught an engineer, he would have probably fixed that. Another engineering, we're going to diss Brainerd Jones here for a couple of minutes. Another example of an engineering mistake was the house we saw, the Lumsden, the Belvedere house. Well, it's 1901. Santa Rosa's not really that completely built out yet. And you've got this Belvedere, you've got this, tower where you should be able to look over all of Santa Rosa, right? You can't get to it. Underneath that is a closet. And there's a very rough ladder nailed to one side of the wall. But if you get up through the trapdoor, these portals, they're like a foot off the ground. So to look out of them, you kind of have to kneel or lay down and crank your head to look outside. Jones, several of the things that you would see in the 1910s that Jones did also come out of Stickley. They're very closely, they could be more original, but Jones is pulling stuff from all the sources that he could. And like all architects did. What he did here in 1908 was this. Very much in the craftsman style that was now popular at the time. This is the style that we now pretty much call First Bay tradition. This was the Saturday afternoon club at Santa Rosa. So, we're going to end this little survey of young Brainerd Jones with the earliest known picture of it. This is the groundbreaking for that building we just saw, the Saturday afternoon club. Here he is at age 39. As you can see, he's a short man. And in his voter registration, his height kept changing. He grew. When he first registered to vote, he was what? 5'6" 3/4. The next time he's 5'7". He finally ends up at 5'8". But at this point in his life, this is 1908, and he's designed at least 25 homes, as well as commercial buildings and a remarkable public library. So if he had retired this next day, he would have left a towering legacy. No question about it. But he remained working for another 37 years. So let's ask the question, go back to those questions I asked at the beginning. Was he a genius? Well, it's just jaw-dropping. He accomplished what he did with almost no training and no education beyond what he could read in magazines and what he saw on the street. Yeah, his lack of engineering, caused some problems. But you know what? You can say the same thing about Frank Lloyd Wright. All his buildings leak. So, were his designs architectural masterpieces? Now, I would argue, I would argue this building qualifies. And it's neoclassical, but it's also original. You've got, again, deconstructed Palladian windows with those big fan lights out there. And, of course, there's the stained glass dome. Something you don't see in libraries. You see it in banks, and you see it in hotels, and big businesses and churches. But in a library, and again, I go back to that game I say I like to play. How could you have screwed this up? I mean, this is a library. You're not supposed to be looking, you're supposed to be looking down at your books, right? And surely it would have made more sense to have, a clear skylights and down, drop lights, so you can read better. Which, of course, is what Santa Rosa did in its original Carnegie Library. But, this is totally impractical. I believe every home he designed was a masterpiece to its original owner. Each one of them was designed to fit their tastes and their lifestyles like a glove. Mrs. Brown obviously wanted an old-fashioned look, and Jones gave it to her. But, again, his genius was subtractive. He didn't let it lard on. He didn't let her lard on everything she might have wanted in Victorian ornamentation. Blitz Paxton wanted to have the biggest house in town, so he and his wife could throw lavish parties. And Jones gave him that. But he also gave him this ultra-modern design that was sure to draw attention to Paxton. So this is what I think was Brainerd Jones's real genius. He really intensely listened to every single client he had. He wanted to understand what would make them happy in their lives. He wasn't like a modern contractor that fans out of a shirt and saying, pick one of these 8 designs. And this also shows how deeply he understood the principles of John Ruskin. When you live in a house that's been put together thoughtfully, even if it's a simple California cottage, it has impact on your outlook every single day. And this is what Coxhead and Wills Polk and Maybeck, they all knew this. Architecture is more than about picturesque street views. Architecture is about creating art that someone actually lived in. So, as I said, at this address, I'm going to have all the talk, as well as all the slides, probably late tomorrow or Monday sometime. Thank you very much.
For anyone else who has additional questions?
Sure, I'll hang out here, and again, at that website, you'll have the whole presentation in 36 hours or so.
Thank you for coming, and if you're interested in any additional presentations like this concerning architecture, there's information on the desk of other events that are coming up in the near future.
Oh, I wrote a book called Petaluma.
Catherine. It might be that. Yeah.